Okay, well, thanks for being here. You know, I consider this basically a glorified tailgate briefing. That's the way I look at it. Everybody's here for their yearly large tailgate briefing as far as weather and, all the other predictions, the partnerships, the sharing of information. That's why we're all here. So I'm going to get started with my little presentation. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit of how we're going to assess fuels going forward for determinations of fire weather watches and red flag warnings from the National Weather Service. And then I'm going to get into the seasonal forecast and the amount of time that I have available, what's going forward through the winter months and the dry season ahead for our neck of the woods here in Florida. So we're going to talk a little bit about the National Fire Danger Rating System. Has anybody used that or heard of it as far as assessing fuels, the state of fuels, not only around Florida, but around the Southeast and even the whole U.S.? Well, the Southeastern U.S. is stitched into a national outlook. It's called the National Fire Danger Rating System. The rating system is operationally used throughout the U.S., as well as here in the state of Florida, to determine the state of fuels with an added weather component to give a big picture expectation of large fire potential, or the possibility of escape fire as well, or large fires that could affect not only Florida but the entire United States when the entire map is considered as one whole thing. So the National Fire Danger Rating System, it actually went through a revision that completed earlier this calendar year as far as how they're going to determine the dryness of fuels throughout the continental U.S., the state of fuel moisture, the state of drought, tying that all together into the expectation of a possibility of large fire, as well as the ability to manage and mitigate fire for planning purposes. So as part of that, fuel models were redetermined, were recalibrated, and the G model that was used in the state of Florida up until about a year ago has done away with. So you're not going to hear a fuel model G anymore anywhere in the country. It's been recategorized into fuel model Y. So again, the fire danger rating system it's a severe fire danger index. It's an adjusted fire danger rating, not only for regional, but for national big picture. And the forecast itself for the National Fire Danger Rating goes from day 0 out to day 7. So it is certainly a planning model that can be used for operational planning, operational impacts, staging of resources, adjustment of personnel, delegation of personnel going forward from days 1 through 7. Now, looking at how it's used, this is a snapshot here of the southern area, which extends from Florida up into the Carolina, Virginia area and over to the state of Texas. This is an example of a single day's color-coded values of the determination for that day. So if you look closer to the map, there's what we call predictive service areas. These are individual areas that have been blocked off based upon climatology, type of fuel, and just a general assessment of trying to group together similar conditions, fuel and fire history wise throughout the state. The state of Florida is broken off into 4 predictive service areas. The Panhandle is separated into 2 areas, North Florida and the Panhandle, separated just to the east of Tallahassee. The area that encompasses Central Florida extends from the Ocala Forest down to the Sebastian Inlet area, including Osceola County. So Osceola County is right here in the Central Florida area. And then there's a South Florida zone, which is south of there over the peninsula. So each of these predictive service areas are updated on the status of fuel and weather influences once a day, going out for a 7-day period. These updates occur at usually by about mid-afternoon, Monday through Friday. So the revisions aren't available on federal holidays or the weekends. So let's look at Florida in particular. This is an example of a static map of a single day on the left-hand side. So in other words, for this day, there was a yellow or low fire impact potential for, and the development, other words, of a large or significant fire is low. And then on this day, on the left-hand side, the South Florida zone is basically no detectable fire potential for large fire. Now, also on this website, the website is going to be provided to all the participants that signed up for Mary's email. I'll make sure to get that to you, so you'll have a source of where to go for these maps. This is the 7-day matrix on the right-hand side for all of those individual predictive service areas. So in this case, there was a brown or moderate potential that was at the northern zone there, and that's actually in Alabama in that specific case there. So you can see right on the edge of the map, there was a little bit of brown that's occurring on the left-hand side over North Alabama. That's just a depiction of that on the right-hand. So the right-hand map is a mosaic of the 7-day potential for each one of the predictive service areas. So carrying that forward, the red flag criteria as it is now in the state of Florida, there is some subject to revision of this going forward in the next calendar year. But as it stands right now, the National Weather Service field offices are going to take this fire potential map that I just showed you, and we're going to use that for fuel determination as far as the dryness of fuel. So for red flag conditions, there has to be at least a brown or moderate fire potential outlook for the predictive service area as far as the fuel state. And now for overall red flag conditions, it'll have to be brown, as well as the existing weather requirements of 15-mile-an-hour sustained wind at the 20-foot level and 35% humidity. Now, you'll probably notice, anybody that's been in operations over the last several years, there hasn't been a lot of red flag days. We do that on purpose because we want to make them worthwhile, operationally worthwhile, to absolutely get the headline out that these are red flag conditions. Anytime you see a red flag warning in the state of Florida, you want to have your internal alarm bells out that everything is lining up, both in the fuels as well as the weather conditions, that this could be a big fire weather day as far as its spread potential and the ignition of new fire. And that's certainly going to be true going forward with this new criteria. So what we're going to provide as far as the website, you'll be able to look at this website going out for 7 days in the future. And if you see any browns or higher, as far as moderate or higher, if the weather happens to line up on the top of that, that's what we're going to be looking at the Weather Service, is the weather forecast with this fuel state going forward. We will issue either a fire weather watch or a red flag warning if we're confident that we're going to have those conditions develop. Again, this is a work in progress as far as the determinations of the status of each predictive service area daily. It's certainly not in place. There's continual research that's going on as far as fire response, fire development in these areas. And again, to stress, the forecast wind and humidity requirements that we use in the National Weather Service is going to remain the same, at least for the time being, in determination of red flag conditions. So here's an example of the static map that's available once a day. This is the website where that static national map is available. Again, we will provide additional information to you in the form of an email next week is the intention. So you'll be able to look at this on your own by about mid-afternoon daily, again, is where it's updated. But we will, at the National Weather Service, be using this map in our determinations of fire weather watch or red flag warning operationally. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the dry season and what we're looking at ahead for upcoming in the rest of this year and going into 2024. Now, for those of you that have lived in Florida any amount of time, you understand that we don't experience 4 seasons here like our partners up to the north, anywhere in the continental U.S. We have what's called a subtropical wet, dry climate here in the state of Florida. In other words, the calendar year is typically broken up into 2 6-month periods of wet, rainy season, humid, and then the dry winter months. Looking at the curve right now, we're getting close to the bottom part of that, where the dry season is certainly manifesting itself. seasonally, statistically, the month of November in Florida is the driest month of the year. So here's a snippet I took last week of the rainfall that's happened over the last 90 days in the state of Florida. This is radar indicated rainfall. Notice on this map, if you look, you'll see a lot of oranges and yellows over in the west part of the state. They've certainly had a dry period of time over the last 3 calendar months in Tampa's area, the Tampa Bay, and even the entire western part of the peninsula with lack of rainfall. We've been a little more beneficial here as far as rainfall from Osceola County and over to the East Coast. The reason why that's been in place is because the predominance of westerly wind on the big picture. Storms really haven't had a chance to develop in the western part of the peninsula because everything, for the most part, has been blown in to the interior or certainly over to the East Coast as well on the Atlantic side. Keach Byram shows somewhat of a reflection of that. The image on the right-hand side. And all in all, though, we're in pretty good shape. These blues that you see here are indications of duff moisture that's in a fairly good state of response as far as wetness and receiving rainfall over the past 2 to 3 months. And the only place that's really showing any notable dryness is along the I-4 corridor there going towards Tampa Bay, especially on the western side of the state. And then up in there's still a drought condition up in the western panhandle of Florida. Notice that the oranges and reds up John Sadler's area and west of there, well, there's still some fire issues possibly that could crop up given the amount of rain that's forecast. So the NOAA drought monitor, this was updated recently, showing the state of Florida generally in fairly good condition as far as drought. There's not really any perceptible drought unless you go closer to the Tampa Bay area, near Sarasota, Bradenton, and then over towards the further western panhandle. And of course, Louisiana, Mississippi are not doing well at all right now as far as long-term rainfall. So we have to talk about El Nino when I give this presentation, because that's our big climate driver during the winter months in Florida. How much heating is going on or lack of heating that's going on in the tropical Pacific Ocean. El Nino is characterized by warmer than normal water in the assessment region of the tropical Pacific. So the map that you see there on the left-hand side, the El Nino state is right near the equator there in the tropical Pacific Ocean. If there's abnormal warming that's developing in the Pacific Ocean, extending from the central Pacific over to South America. And what I'm going to tell you right now is that we are already in a proclaimed El Nino condition, even before winter starts in the southern U.S. We have some high-tech satellites that are able to do imagery straight down through the atmosphere, and they detect how much warming is going on in the Pacific Ocean in these assessment regions right here that go all the way almost all over to Australia. Constantly looking at the oceanic temperatures in this area. And so as of October 21st, the image on the top shows how much warmth there is in the tropical Pacific. Those assessment regions are reflecting very warm conditions already across the Pacific Ocean. And the Climate Prediction Center, our parent agency as part of NOAA, already has an El Nino advisory in effect for the warming that's occurring across the Pacific Ocean. The curve that you see here is showing that El Nino conditions on a dynamical statistical model are expected to continue through the spring of next year, and moderate to strong El Nino event is a fairly high likelihood of occurring during this winter. There's actually, the last time I saw the assessment, there's actually a 30% chance of a historically strong El Nino occurring. In other words, for you folks that were here in '98, in the winter of '98, when we had tornadoes, lots of storms, lots of Gulf systems coming across, there actually is a chance of that, about a 30-ish%, that it could be a historically El Nino as far as strength. But if you look at that curve, the peak of it is yet to come. We're right here where the line starts scattering, where that black line starts scattering on the left-hand part of that image on the bottom. That's just where we're at right now. So the dynamical statistical models are still showing increasing water temperatures as we get into early next year. So it's not over for sure as far as the peak or the strength of it. So just as a primer on what happens in strong or moderate El Nino is that we have a very enhanced storm track across the southern tier of the US. So across Old Mexico, across Texas and the Gulf and Florida Peninsula, there's an enhanced storm track. A lot of Gulf of Mexico systems typically make their way across the Florida Peninsula and affect us directly in the form of rain systems, frequent rain systems, as well as the possibility of tornadoes. A higher than normal tornado risk will exist Florida Peninsula through this winter. This is kind of an animation here showing the typical storm track of what I just described going across the Gulf of Mexico, Old Mexico, and eventually the Florida Peninsula. So the things that go along with the strong El Nino is that the lightning intensity, as well as the amount of lightning flashes, increases significantly across the state. And that's just due to that storminess, the increase of storminess from Gulf systems coming across. But look at the comparison to a La Nina, how much more lightning there is that we expect generally with the storminess pattern across the state compared to a La Nina. A lot more lightning. So just looking back, I described tornadoes and the likelihood of strong storms moving across. We've had some significant tornadoes across the Florida Peninsula during moderate to strong El Ninos. And the bottom image there shows that we not only have had an increase in tornadoes, but we've also had long track tornadoes, damaging long track tornadoes. Back in '98, there was a couple of tornadoes that actually moved across Osceola County, right in this area, that produced a dozen or greater fatalities. So that's one thing that when you hear alerts from your weather office, tornado watches, and the alerting of specific tornadoes and tornado warnings, make sure to take action. Have your alert status turned on so you can be notified. And the nice thing about cell phone technology now is just in the last 5 or 6 years, since our last very strong El Nino, we receive targeted alerting on our cell phones now for all tornado warnings. So if you have a cell phone on and you have your alerting enabled, which it comes by default on your cell phones, you can receive a tower-based cell alert from your provider. Your cell phone provider will port tornado warnings directly to your cell phone and audibly alert you. And we've saved countless lives in the Weather Service just in the last 5 years by the ability to warn on cell phones for tornadoes. So precipitation-wise, not a big surprise that with the increased storminess across the Gulf of Mexico that we're expecting this winter, the rainfall chances are higher. Statistically strong El Ninos, which were in 1982 and 1983, as well as 97 and 98. So the bottom two thumbnail images there, high rainfall chances. For making plans for prescribed burning, I expect some impacts on your burn plans this winter. I would expect by January through the rest of the winter months, I'm expecting enough rainfall to impact your burning is my prediction. And then on the flip side, La Ninas, a lot less rainfall. So as far as predictability and freeze events, stronger El Ninos tend to lessen the number of extreme freezes across the region because we have a storm track that's opened up from the Gulf. It really doesn't allow for Arctic air intrusions in general. We can't completely preclude them from the forecast, but it's just a statistically less of a chance of Arctic air intrusions and really strong cold events occurring during El Ninos that we're expecting this winter. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is just increased storminess, increased rainfall, less Arctic intrusions is the prediction for this coming dry season. The specific outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, Florida and the Northern Gulf Coast is highlighted for the highest amount of rainfall for the entire winter months going forward. And the northernmost part of the U.S. is below normal just because of that enhanced storm track closer to home here in Florida. Temperature-wise, again, not big impacts are expected in temperature, equal chances of warm or cold events across the southeastern U.S. and above normal temperatures generally expected across the northern tier of the U.S. going forward. The specific dry season outlook, this was just updated by the National Weather Service in Melbourne. So they're again calling for strong El Nino conditions through the November, December, January timeframe, near normal temperatures, above normal precipitation, and above normal storminess. So all the things I just described on our website is what we're predicting going forward. And then as we go into the spring months, things start getting a little bit closer to normal. The strong El Nino is expected to lessen its hold on the region. So temperatures go back to below normal with continuing above normal precipitation and well above normal storminess all the way into the spring months. The National Weather Service, we update our local forecast prediction on El Nino occasionally. So this is the web link, and I'll make sure to provide this in the email as well that Mary sends out. And the Climate Prediction Center, which updates their assessment of El Nino once per week at cpc.ncep.noaa.gov. A human being will update that once a week. And with that, I will have a brief amount of time for questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions. I'm assuming there's a mic here, but I don't see one. So we'll be very loud. So who has a question for John? There's a what? Yeah, but I need to have those folks tell me a question. So I need an actual mic. We can use actually, so I raise your hand, please. Let's have a. Yeah, we'll just repeat it. Raise your hand. Let's have a question.
Well, I'm just curious about the predictive maps you were showing at the beginning that had Florida in 4 regions, with the South being one. I was wondering if you guys have thought about splitting that into East and West.
Yeah. Okay. There was a question about the predictive service areas and Florida dividing into 4 predictive service areas. The question was, there possibility of splitting predictive service areas? That the development of predictive service areas is done by the people that have developed the National Fire Danger Rating System, and they're based largely in Missoula, Montana, at the fire lab up there. So the query would have to be made to the bigger picture folks at that do the National Fire Danger Rating System. It's in other words, we can't do it just locally here. It would have to be brought up to a higher level, that the people that handle it nationally.
Raise your hand, nice and tall. Yeah. Actually, stand up, please. Whoever has a question.
Yeah, it's over there.
Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the Canadian smoke that invaded?
Okay, can I comment on the Canadian smoke that invaded it? And I actually was going to comment on that. Thank you for bringing that up, because what happened up there is lots of wildfire obviously developed. The smoke in the weather pattern brought that down, and especially into the northeastern part of the U.S. Early part of this summer. So millions of people in the northeastern U.S. were affected by smoke who have in their lifetimes probably never had smoke like that, as far as the respiratory issues, realizing respiratory issues that they had. We actually got some of the residual of that down here in Florida a little bit later. It was only about 1 or 2 months ago. There was some of that Canadian smoke that worked itself down into Florida and gave us some reduced air quality for several days. Is that what you're referring to, that made it down to Florida?
Yes, it was a really fine white, not something we're used to with smoke.
Yes, it was a really fine smoke. And it was, as far as the impacts, it was very apparent on the sunrises and sunsets. The sun disk was turned into orange. The air quality in that did make it into that it affected sensitive populations, children, elderly, those with pre-existing respiratory issues. There was a potential to affect them for several days, given that reduced air quality. So that was pretty incredible that reduced air quality made it down from that far away. It is possible, when the weather setup is right, with the orientation of weather features, that we can get distant smoke source impacts here in Florida.
All right. Yes, sir.
And we're in the area was in the red area along the west coast, just in Sarasota Manatee area. Through the winter months where we may see some rain in the peninsula. Would El Nino possibly still keep us from having that rain get to us on that particular area, just like it's doing right now?
So the question was, is the forecast El Nino, will it prevent the west coast of Florida from getting the forecast rainfall? And no, that what happens is, like I was talking about the storm track coming from the Gulf, systems will develop upstream from Florida. So there will be rain producers that'll be over the Gulf of Mexico, and they will affect the entire peninsula with rainfall. That's my expectation.
Zach, we have an online question.
Go for it.
Okay, the online question was, Mr. Pendergrast, when do you expect the winter El Nino rain to occur?
Well, like I was saying, do I need to repeat that?
No.
Okay, so like I was saying, we are already in a proclaimed El Nino state. The Climate Prediction Center has proclaimed an El Nino advisory. So as far as the wintertime rains, I would expect by January at the latest, given prior El Nino episodes and just going back on climatology, I would expect by at least January to start getting Gulf systems, numerous Gulf systems. In other words, at least every 3 to 5 days, it wouldn't surprise me to get a Gulf-based system moving across Florida once the full effects of El Nino become manifest by about January or so.
All right, follow-up question to that is, do you expect these fronts to stall out in southeast Florida and then be a static front and produce more rain than normal?
No, I expect a progressive pattern. We call this a progressive pattern. In other words, the systems that I'm expecting that will come from the Gulf will sweep across the entire state. I know back in 1998, there were tornadoes in Key West out of systems. So it won't just affect North and Central Florida. It's going to affect the entire peninsula once it's fully manifest this winter.
All right, folks, that is all the time we have to make time for the next speaker. So thank you very much for that.